Hi, I'm Tessa from Brainrot News, and I've got a big helping of technocratic fascist fever dreams served fresh from the darkest corners of Silicon Valley's wet nightmares for you to choke on. Today, we are taking a long, uncomfortable look at one of Silicon Valley's most peculiar exports, Curtis Yarvin, also known by his pen name, Mencius Moldbug, which sounds less like a political theorist and more like something your IT department quarantines. Yarvin is a former tech founder turned political philosopher whose big idea is that democracy is inefficient and should be replaced with something more like a startup with a CEO president, no elections, and a corporate board instead of Congress. He does not want to improve democracy. He wants to uninstall it, wipe the hard drive, and replace it with what he calls a hard reset, an executive-run state with no public accountability, run by small, enlightened elite. However, he's not shouting it in YouTube rants. He's calmly writing blog posts, books, whispering in the ears of some of the most influential people in the world, and getting funding from libertarian billionaires to bring his horrifying vision of America and the rest of the world to fruition. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why a thinker who went from complex code to advocating for a streamlined autocracy is still getting invited to high-powered dinners, and why his vision of governance might be less like the future and more like a reboot of the 17th century with better branding.
Brainrot the news.
Part 1. The Algorithms of Autocracy. Let's talk about Curtis Guy Yarvin, better known by his online name, Mencius Moldbug, who sits at the gnarled root of one of the most deranged branches of the modern far-right. Born in 1973, he's a darling of the far-right intelligentsia. If your idea of intellect involves elaborate defenses of monarchy by someone who's never had to do a day of actual labor. Yarvin and philosopher Nick Land, whose own writings read like if Nietzsche dropped acid in a server farm, are the spiritual architects of the so-called neo-reactionary movement, or NRX. Also known as the Dark Enlightenment, a name so pretentious that it sounds like a Hot Topic rebrand for fascism. If you've never heard of it, congratulations for knowing what grass smells like. But the gist of it is that they believe democracy is a mistake, equality is a lie, and the only way to fix modern society is to replace the concept of a representative government with a single CEO-style autocrat. Yarvin dreams of replacing American democracy with a slick, Silicon Valley-style monarchy. Essentially Jeff Bezos in a crown, only somehow less benevolent. He argues that regular people are too dim to govern themselves, which is rich, coming from a man whose political program reads like a Reddit thread for aspiring warlords. In place of voting, Yarvin wants to turn the country into a corporate dictatorship. One of Yarvin's most infamous ideas is that of the Cathedral, his pet name for the supposedly vast, shadowy cabal of liberal academics and journalists who, according to him, secretly run everything. The same scapegoat used by anyone whose ideas could not win a PTA election. In Yarvin's theories, the Cathedral is the invisible hand that shapes public opinion, not through force, but through the dangerous, dark art of teaching facts and using critical thinking. His solution is to dismantle it, burn it down, and replace it with a top-down technocracy run by very chronically online intellectuals who think civil rights were a mistake and spreadsheets should govern society. Little Curtis doesn't bother hiding his genuinely alarming ideology behind academic jargon or polite smiles. Instead, he meticulously lays it all out in blog posts, laying out his plans for dismantling democracy in exhaustive detail with the fervor of a man who's been banned from too many Magic the Gathering tournaments. Yarvin has become an intellectual lodestar for a new generation of far-right tech elites, venture capitalists, and even MAGA-adjacent thinkers who see in his writings a blueprint for how to run America like a wholly owned subsidiary, prioritizing unchecked executive power and rendering the Constitution obsolete. His ideas have wormed their way into right-wing think tanks, authoritarian curious influencers, and the dreams of Peter Thiel-funded nihilists who believe the future belongs not to the people, but to a board of directors in a bunker. When people talk about threats to democracy, we normally picture Trump yelling on a golf cart or Elon Musk tweeting himself into a subpoena. But the real danger might be nerds in khakis dreaming of a monarchy powered by venture capital. Yarvin may not be storming the Capitol with zip ties, but he is offering the blueprint for a version of America where you do not get to vote, you get a CEO. If we do not call it out for what it is, a fascist fantasy dressed in Silicon Valley buzzwords, it might slither out of the blogosphere and into actual policy. Part 2. The Unqualified Reservations of a Political Architect. Every blueprint for a truly unsettling new world order has an origin story, and Curtis Yarvin, America's most academically overqualified techno-fascist, is no exception. Born in 1973 to a family that probably never imagined their precocious little Curtis would grow up to advocate for a techno-monarchist coup, he was raised by liberal, secular parents with deep roots in leftist politics. His paternal grandparents were Jewish-American communists, and his dad, Herbert Yarvin, worked as a US diplomat, which makes Curtis's eventual ideological pivot feel like he mistook rebellion for abolishing representative government. By age 12, Curtis had already been recruited into the Johns Hopkins study of mathematically precocious youth, a sort of Mensa for toddlers setup that suggests he was solving differential equations while other kids were eating glue. He eventually attended Brown University and briefly enrolled in a PhD program at UC Berkeley, only to drop out and dive headfirst into Silicon Valley, where the gospel of disruption wasn't limited to industries, leading some to eye the operating system of democracy itself. It was in this cauldron of capital, code, and chronic libertarianism that Yarvin began his ideological molting process. In the 1990s tech scene, a place where people genuinely believed market forces could cure poverty and that humans could be optimized like search engines, Yarvin found fertile ground for his evolution from code monkey to digital reactionary. Introduced to libertarian thinkers like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard by Glenn Reynolds, Yarvin quickly became enamored with the Austrian school, an economic tradition that treats empiricism the way cats treat bathtubs. The Austrians reject empirical evidence in favor of pure deduction from first principles, which makes them ideal reading material for guys who believe the world can be solved with logic alone, usually while ignoring centuries of social reality. The philosophical embrace of a reality-optional worldview helped set Yarvin on the path towards arguing with alarming seriousness that a dictatorship run like a private company is the best way to govern the most powerful country in human history. In 2002, Yarvin founded a decentralized software platform whose exact purpose has remained as cryptic as its interface. To the uninitiated, Urbit is either a bold leap forward in personal server sovereignty or a sort of libertarian Minecraft. In 2013, Yarvin helped launch Talon Corp to commercialize this vision with funding from Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist equivalent of a Bond villain with a Nietzschean book club. Although Yarvin formally left Talon in 2019, he continues to haunt Urbit like a political Baroque ghost in the machine. Yarvin's dabbling in political theory, long recursive blog posts attempting to explain why elections are passé, eventually caught up with him. As he grew louder in his disdain for democracy, tech conferences began dropping him faster than Facebook drops responsibility for societal collapse. It turns out that telling a room full of venture capitalists you'd like to replace Congress with a CEO who answers to no one except the market is a tough pitch, even for people who think Elon Musk is Moses. Enter Mencius Moldbug, his online alter ego. In 2007, Yarvin began blogging under this name at Unqualified Reservations, a title that is both a website and a warning. His pseudonym blends the name of a Confucian philosopher, Mencius, with a nod to Goldbug economics, and has the unmistakable whiff of someone trying very hard to sound like an oracle. The blog became a digital Eldorado for contrarians, incels, fascist-curious libertarians, and just-asking question types who all shared one thing in common: a deep, spiritual hatred of modernity, democracy, and women with opinions. Yarvin's blog served as a dumping ground for essays, manifestos, and the occasional waking nightmare about replacing democracy with a benevolent technocrat king. He was one of the earliest adopters of the red pill metaphor, appropriating the Matrix to argue that waking up meant realizing equality is a lie and democracy is a mistake. Essentially, a plot twist where Neo sides with Agent Smith and privatizes the simulation. His pseudonym helped insulate him from immediate professional fallout, though the eventual leak of his real identity seemed inevitable given the sheer volume of content and his apparent inability to stop talking. He stopped updating Unqualified Reservations in 2013, declaring its mission complete, as though he'd just finished writing the fascist version of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he returned in 2020 with Grey Mirror, a blog whose name suggests a dark parody of tech-driven dystopia, but whose content is more of a how-to guide for implementing one. By now, he wasn't just dancing around the idea of authoritarianism, he was advocating for a soft fascist coup in the United States where democracy could be swept aside like a failed beta test and replaced with a CEO king backed by billionaires, algorithms, and crypto. Throughout this journey, Yarvin's descent from disaffected libertarian coder to full-blown monarchist simp has served as a disturbing blueprint for a new breed of tech-enabled authoritarianism. It is a philosophy tailor-made for Silicon Valley megalomaniacs who hate paying taxes ideas, think social responsibility is a Ponzi scheme, and would like to swap representative government for absolute corporate control. In short, Yarvin's trajectory has been from precocious math prodigy to tech industry exile to monarchist blogger with a startup. And if nothing else, he has been consistent in his absolute refusal to entertain the idea that ordinary people should have a say in how they're governed. Part 3. Monarchism for Redditors. Yarvin's so-called butterfly revolution, a name that invokes metamorphosis, but in this case, the butterfly emerges as a jackbooted technocrat, lays out his grand vision for smashing the United States government and rebooting it as a streamlined autocratic enterprise. This is not reform. It is not even reactionary nostalgia. It is, by his own design, an internal coup, one part Silicon Valley boardroom fantasy, one part 20th century authoritarian playbook, and all wrapped in the language of systems optimization. At the center of this vision is the idea of total power being concentrated in a single organization. Think of it as the United States government incorporated, with a single executive holding absolute authority. Not coincidentally, this executive would be styled as a national CEO, overseeing what Yarvin sees not as a civic republic, but as a kind of coast-to-coast real estate firm. He wants a sovereign with full spectrum dominance over every institution, agency, and bureaucrat in sight. Under his vision for America, Congress should be deleted, the courts should be ignored, and the Constitution should be filed under legacy software. In Yarvin's dream world, the United States is not a democracy, it is a startup with nukes, and the people are just unwilling interns who do not get a vote. This is where the RAGE campaign comes in. That is short for Retire All Government Employees, though RAGE also happens to capture the tone of every Moldbug blog post ever written. The idea is to fire every nonpartisan federal worker and replace them with loyalists, to speed up efficiency, because if history has taught us anything, it's that purging bureaucracies and stacking institutions with fanatics never end in mass graves or show trials. In Yarvin's model, if the courts object to this sweeping institutional purge, they can be safely ignored. After all, nothing builds public trust like declaring the judiciary optional while he's at it. Yarvin proposes we tackle the other usual suspects of tyrants in training: freedom of the press, academic freedom, and the general concept of education not curated by the regime. His solution is to defund, dismantle, and in the case of universities, entertain ideas of physical and economic liquidation. After all, tenure is a much greater threat than tyranny. All roads in this ideology lead to sovereignty invested in a single individual, a CEO king for the age of cryptocurrency. Yarvin notably views Donald Trump as a possible vessel for this royalist fantasy. Trump's open contempt for congressional power, especially when it comes to appropriations, isn't a red flag to Yarvin. It is a green light. He sees it as a necessary first step towards a world where the executive doesn't just veto bills, but writes them in blood. The butterfly revolution is not interested in elections, constitutions, or public debate. It is interested in power, with one person at the top, everyone else down below stripped of their rights and told to get in line or get purged. In short, Yarvin's revolution is neither butterfly nor revolution. It is a velvet-gloved call for dictatorship delivered in the syntax of a product pitch. It seeks to extinguish the very institutions that make America a democracy, from the courts to the free press to the civil service, and replace them with a glossy corporate monarchy, one nation under management. Part 4. Feudalism rebranded for the tech bro era. Just when you thought Curtis Yarvin couldn't go more mask off than liquidate the universities, Yarvin's political imagination continues its descent into the uncanny valley of techno-feudal governance with his concept of the Patchwork government, a plan to dismantle nation-states altogether and replace them with a checkerboard of privatized city-states, each run like a sovereign startup. Imagine 21st century feudalism, but with customer service policies and a terms of service agreement instead of a constitution. These patches would be sovereign joint stock corporations rather than governments. In this vision, the United States and presumably all of Earth is dissolved into a constellation of tiny sovereign corporate entities called gov-corps. Each one is a fully privatized city-state run like a joint stock company, complete with shareholders, private contracts, and the omnipresent threat of getting fired, not just from your job, but from society itself. In this vision, residents wouldn't have voting rights. Their main option for political expression would be be what Yarvin calls voting with their feet. That is, if you don't like how your local gov-corp handles education, policing, or basic human dignity, you can always uproot your entire life, sell your possessions, and go find a nicer dystopia next door. Freedom, in Yarvin's model, is not a right, it is a subscription plan. And if you don't like the current package, you are welcome to cancel and walk right to the next corporate enclave. In this brave new patchwork, executives wield total authority over their domains. They are appointed by shareholders and not beholden to any electorate, constitution, or inconvenient public opinion. These executives, or as Yarvin calls them, CEO monarchs, would govern efficiently, free from the inefficiencies of democracy, civil rights, or due process. Their job is not to represent the people, but to maximize security and prosperity. Terms which in corporate governance tend to prioritize property values over people. This is capitalism without the window dressing. No elections, no rights, just raw power and quarterly profit goals. Think of it as feudalism for crypto bros. Should a resident fail to contribute to the patch, presumably economically, though Yarvin is light on the fine print, they may be removed like underperforming assets. Citizenship becomes a matter of contract. One enters into a private agreement with their governing corporation, which can be revised or revoked as the market demands. This entire model recasts the fundamental purpose of government. Instead of being a collective enterprise for ensuring public welfare, it becomes a series of transactional relationships overseen by unelected oligarchs. The entire edifice is built on the fantasy that governance is just another service industry, and that liberty, equality, and justice are optional features you can opt into, provided you can afford the premium. If you don't like the hand you're dealt, you can simply break your contract and apply to live somewhere else, assuming the algorithm deems you fit for residency. That's the beauty of Yarvin's vision. You're not a citizen, you are a customer, and customers can be banned. And because Yarvin is nothing if not a dystopian completionist, his model also includes statewide surveillance as a feature, not a bug. Imagine a series of Ring cameras, but they're watching your soul. These patches would use comprehensive data tracking to maintain order, because freedom apparently is biometric check-ins just to take out your trash. The surveillance state isn't just encouraged, it is baked into the business model. Oh, but don't worry, Yarvin assures us you still have freedom, not freedom of speech, or assembly, or bodily autonomy. Those are obsolete in version 2.0. No. Your freedom is the ability to pack your bags and move to another fiefdom. It's Uber for government. If Uber canceled your ride halfway to the hospital because your social credit score dropped after tweeting, "I missed the First Amendment." Yarvin's patchwork is a gilded cage, sleek, efficient, and ideologically sanitized of the mess and noise of a real democracy. It is a system where rights are conditional, leadership is unaccountable, and your status as a citizen is subject to performance review. If the founders had envisioned this kind of regime, they would have skipped the Declaration of Independence and gone straight to a shareholder agreement. Yarvin's patchwork isn't the future. It is a past already buried where kings ruled by divine right, serfs labored under threat of exile, and your worth was measured by how useful you were to the crown. Only this time, this crown runs on blockchain. Part 5. Defending Democracy from the Dark Enlightenment Death Cult. Curtis Yarvin's philosophy is not just a threat to democracy, it is a suggestion that self-determination is an inefficient and largely dispensable complication. His political vision is the equivalent of running the country like a venture-backed startup whose prime directive is maximum efficiency, even if it means seeing human rights as bugs and social safety nets as defunct features. One thing Yarvin doesn't do is traffic in subtle hints or ironic detachment. He is explicitly calling for the liquidation of democracy, the elimination of public accountability, and the ascension of a glorified corporate pharaoh with absolute power, and he's doing it all with the unblinking certainty of someone convinced they have optimized beyond conventional humanistic concerns. His central premise that most people are simply too stupid to be trusted with self-rule isn't just elitist, it is a sneering, full-throated rejection of the idea that dignity, agency, and political voice belong to everyone, not just the yacht-owning few. He dreams of a society where your value is determined by your net worth, your productivity stats, and your willingness to shut up and obey your CEO king. The rest of us can go pound sand, or more likely get repurposed into renewable energy. He's not just tossing out edgy hypotheticals. This is a man who has openly speculated about turning non-productive citizens into biofuel. I need you to think about who a non-productive citizen may be. The darkly comedic horror is that this fundamentally grotesque thing is being entertained, not in late-night writers' rooms, but reportedly in the circles of billionaires with the means to make unsettling concepts like this a reality, a very dangerous reality. Also, let's not forget his history of saying the quiet parts, not just out loud, but with a PowerPoint. This is a man who's argued that slavery was not all bad, flirted with race science like it was a Tinder match, and regularly regurgitates the kind of social Darwinist nonsense that would make the eugenics crowd blush. That brings me to my next point, the issue of race, an area where Yarvin's views nosedive from merely dangerous to outright despicable. His casual musings on the supposed natural fitness of some people for servitude would have been offensive even in 1850. In 2025, they are radioactive. His embrace of long debunked pseudoscience about racial intelligence disparities and his nostalgia for pre-civil rights America are not just bad ideas, they are moral sinkholes. Notably, his ideal society seems designed to gatekeep access to rights and resources through corporate vetting rather than citizenship. It's less land of the free and more land of the franchised. Then there's the Patchwork, Yarvin's nightmarish choose-your-own authoritarian adventure. In this realm of algorithmic serfdom, if you're not useful to the shareholders of your local gov-corp, you can be evicted, exiled, or worse. Maybe you'll be biofuel. There are no elections, no unions, and no social safety nets, just contracts, surveillance, and the ever-present anxiety that your CEO thinks your cholesterol to productivity ratio is cutting into Q3 growth. It is streamlined authoritarianism by design, and in his view, it is long overdue. The reason Yarvin is dangerous is not just because his ideas are evil, it is because they are seductive to a particular kind of power-hungry elite. Tech billionaires who see democracy as an annoying barrier to innovation love this guy. They nod along while sipping Soylent, dreaming of walled cities with private police forces and citizenship by venture capital. It's libertarianism mutated into full-blown technofeudalism, and Yarvin is their court philosopher. That is why defending democracy is more urgent than ever. That means fighting for your voting rights, not purging voters from rolls. It means protecting civil liberties, funding public education, expanding healthcare, and building a government that answers to the people, not to capital, not to algorithms, and definitely not to failed tech bros who believe the highest political ROI is achieved by eliminating the overhead of public input. Yarvin's blueprint is a dark mirror reflecting back to the worst instincts of unrestrained capitalism, racism disguised as rationalism, and authoritarianism dressed up in libertarian ideals. It is not satire. It is the ideological scaffolding for a very real assault on equality, justice, and freedom, and it is our job to tear it down before it metastasizes any further. Part 6. From the Blogosphere to the Boardroom. Curtis Yarvin's ideas might read like the output of an AI attempting to generate a political philosophy based on maximizing control and minimizing historical accountability. But disturbingly, they've made their way from blog posts to boardrooms to the backrooms of the American state. You'd think someone advocating for CEO-led technofeudalism and biodiesel for the unproductive policies would be laughed off the internet and relegated to the darkest corners of the digital fringe. But it turns out, if you use enough big words, hate democracy just the right amount, and secure enough seed funding from the likes of Peter Thiel, you too can become the crown jewel of America's intellectual alt-right. Let's start with Thiel, Yarvin's sugar daddy of Silicon Valley fascism. As a billionaire, PayPal co-founder, and ideological venture capitalist with a soft spot for autocracy, Thiel didn't just bankroll Yarvin's software startup Thrawn Corp. Yarvin has openly claimed that Thiel is fully enlightened, which means that he agrees that democracy is a cancer and monarchy is the cure. Thiel, in turn, has mused that freedom and democracy are no longer compatible. Sources have described Yarvin as Thiel's house philosopher, presumably because court jester of the techno-feudalist death cult did not pull as well with investors. Enter J.D. Vance, vice president and Exhibit A in the case for populism as performance art. Thiel bankrolled his Senate campaign. Yarvin inspired his civil service purge strategy. And now Vance is one bad heartbeat away from the presidency. Vance has openly praised Yarvin's Rage Plan, which ironically might be the most honest acronym to come out of the American right in decades. Yarvin himself has described Vance as the ideal candidate to carry out his vision, an endorsement that should raise some eyebrows, if not a few red flags. Then there's Steve Bannon, the unwashed Rasputin of MAGA. While Yarvin claims they have never spoken directly, there's plenty of smoke suggesting indirect contact. Bannon's known for his enthusiasm for the Dark Enlightenment movement, which puts him squarely in the same intellectual cul-de-sac. We can't forget Michael Anton, now quietly sketching regime change strategy in the State Department. He's discussed Yarvin's ideas, including the wet nightmare of installing an American Caesar. Anton has been caught floating strategies that sound suspiciously Yarvinian, which is a hell of a thing to say about a senior State Department official. Then we have Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist who helped bring you web browsers, now bringing Yarvin's ideas to the national conversation through his influence on Trump's tech strategy. Andreessen has publicly praised Yarvin and is reportedly helping vet administrative candidates, effectively bridging the gap between speculative blogs and real-world policy. Speaking of techno-fascists, Elon Musk deserves a shout-out too. He has not endorsed Yarvin explicitly, but he seems to be stress-testing Moldbug's theories in the real world. His Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, a not-so-subtle nod to Rage, is like a hostile takeover orchestrated by Big Brother's HR department. Some sources claim Musk and Trump are taking advice directly from Yarvin, meaning the whispers from the digital fringe are potentially now talking points of power. This spiderweb doesn't end there. Yarvin's been name-dropped or associated with a rogues gallery of crypto-fascist fanboys: Glenn Reynolds, Blake Masters, Josh Hawley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Walter Kern, and of course, Nick Land, the co-creator of the Dark Enlightenment and philosopher of accelerationism, also known as "What if we hit the gas pedal on fascism and drove it straight into the singularity?" What we are looking at is not just a guy with a blog and a superiority complex. It is a sprawling ideological network where anti-democratic techno-feudalism has infiltrated the highest levels of government, tech, finance, and media. Yarvin didn't need to win elections. He just needed to convince a handful of very rich, very powerful men that democracy is an inefficient app that needs to be uninstalled. And now, the country is slated for a radical political reformatting, designed by those who see human systems as code to be rewritten, running on a foundation of transparent tyranny and fueled by a deep-seated belief that the levers of power are not fit for the unwashed masses. Part 7. When the comment section becomes the think tank. Yarvin's blog posts may read like late-night manifesto drafts, but their ideas have proven surprisingly portable, moving from the corners of the internet into the heart of right-wing political strategy. What began as theoretical ramblings under the pen name Mencius Moldbug have evolved into something far more potent, a philosophical toolkit for dismantling liberal democracy from the inside out. This is not just fringe internet nonsense anymore. Yarvinism is now echoing through Capitol Hill, warping the Republican Party's brain like a 4chan shitpost with a venture capital budget. His concept of the Cathedral, a decentralized yet ideological unified network of media, academia, and bureaucracy, has become a kind of gospel among the right libertarians and paleo-conservatives, convinced that a progressive priesthood runs the country behind the scenes. For those already suspicious of the deep state, Yarvin offers a sleek, tech-savvy way of saying, yes, your paranoia is correct, and here is how we burn it all down. The cultural impact of his writing can be seen in the proliferation of the red pill metaphor, which Yarvin helped popularize as a signal of ideological awakening. Today, it is shorthand across right-wing internet spaces for the moment when one realizes that liberal democracy isn't just flawed, it's fundamentally broken. This framing offers a sense of clarity and purpose to those disillusioned with the slow churn of democratic governance, particularly among online youth radicalized by memes, forums, and algorithmic echo chambers. What once lived in Moldbug's WordPress draft folder has become the ideological bedrock of Trumpism. Trump did not read Moldbug. Of course, he doesn't read anything. I'm not even sure he knows how to read, but he didn't have to. The vibe is the same. Burn it down, build a gold-plated throne, rule by decree. Yarvin's rhetoric gave Trumpism a user manual. The disdain for democratic process, hatred for bureaucratic deep state elites, and the idea that a country should be run like a corporation where the boss is always right and unions get dissolved by executive order all came from the depths of Yarvin's twisted fantasies. Nowhere is Yarvin's influence more concrete than in Project 2025, a policy blueprint so soaked in authoritarian aspiration it might as well come with a crown and scepter. The plan reads like Yarvin's wet dreams: fire the civil service, replace them with loyalists, centralize all power in the executive branch, and make the president an unaccountable warlord with broadband. It's rage with better branding. The Department of Government Efficiency is a Yarvinist policy made real: mass layoffs of federal workers, aggressive buyouts, and a purge of the bureaucratic class class aren't policy. They are the lead up to the end of democracy. And the contagion just keeps spreading. From Trump to Thiel to Vance to Doge, Yarvin's ideas are seeping into every crack of the American Rights Foundation. It is no longer enough to complain about the deep state or woke universities. Now they want to gut the state, torch the universities, and install a CEO king who fires judges on Twitter and runs the country like a Series A startup. This is the dark Enlightenment in action. Not some abstract theory about better government, but a real, creeping, deeply unserious plan to end democracy in favor of a reactionary technocracy led by billionaires, bros, and blog boys. Part 8. Reactionary versus reality. Let's take a moment to imagine Curtis Yarvin's patchwork government, brought to life not as a theory, but as your daily reality. Welcome to Feudalism 2.0, now with 100% more venture capital. In this brave new world, the globe is no longer carved up by nations, but sliced into subscription-based gov-corps, each run by a CEO king whose primary duty is not public service, but delivering returns to shareholders. It is governance as a gated community with terms and conditions that can and will get you evicted. The consequences of this patchwork system are not just theoretical, they are horrifyingly plausible and cruelly logical. In Yarvin's dream, the right to live in a society doesn't stem from citizenship, human dignity, or any lofty Enlightenment nonsense. It comes from how useful you are to the bottom line. If you are not useful, have a chronic illness, or you're a political dissenter with too many opinions, you can and will be evicted. The rest of us get to live in a series of hyper-branded technofiefdoms where the price of survival is compliance and your vote is meaningless unless you're on the board. Public services such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure, which in democratic societies are often guaranteed or at the very least subsidized in recognition of the public good, would be evaluated solely through the lens of profitability. If a service doesn't turn a profit, it may simply vanish. In this way, essential needs become luxury commodities, available only to those who can afford them or are deemed worth the investment. Under this model, democracy dies not with a bang, but with an automated billing cycle. There are no elections, no shared civic identity, no public discourse, just constant migration from one dystopian company town patch to another, hoping the next corporate overlord doesn't delete you from the database for being insufficiently aligned with brand values. Yarvin calls this voting with your feet, as if fleeing authoritarian capitalism is the same thing as meaningful choice. And you know, there's always people who end up on the sharp end of systems like this. The poor, the sick, the disabled, people of color, queer folks, and anyone who doesn't look, sound, or earn like the board-approved avatar of productivity. In Yarvin's world, they risk expulsion or neglect, not because they broke laws or posed a threat, no, because they failed to meet the expectations of their corporate landlords. Citizenship becomes a contract subject to cancellation. Even more destabilizing is the potential collapse of national and global cooperation. With hundreds or thousands of independent gov-corps operating with conflicting priorities, coordinated responses to global crises like pandemics, climate change, or mass migration would become logistically and politically untenable. The emphasis on competition over cooperation could fuel not just economic disparity, but social unrest, territorial conflict, and systemic collapse in the face of shared challenges. I am not going to sugarcoat this. Yarvin's patchwork world is not bold or innovative or futuristic. It is medieval feudalism wrapped in Silicon Valley doublespeak and sold as a TED Talk. It is the gilded return of hereditary oligarchy, only this time with VPNs and private equity. If implemented, it would represent the total collapse of the public sphere and a hard reset to the social contract, except this time, the contract's buried in 70 pages of unreadable end-user license agreements. This is not just a bad idea, it is a blueprint for mass inequality, environmental catastrophe, cultural atomization, and corporate authoritarianism on a scale that makes Black Mirror look like Sesame Street. Part 9. The Cure for Technofeudalism. Curtis Yarvin is not just a crackpot logging in a cave. He is a philosopher to billionaires, a whisperer to power, and the ghostwriter of a future we should all be terrified to inhabit. His ideas, wrapped in academic language, Silicon Valley buzzwords, and insufferable smugness, are not harmless thought experiments. They are blueprints for dismantling democracy and replacing it with a nightmarish mashup of monarchy, tech oligarchy, and corporate feudalism. And it's not a theory anymore. It is policy drafts, strategy memos, and and it is creeping into the White House in khakis and venture capital. This is a war on democracy, a hostile takeover of civil rights by technocrats who think empathy is a design flaw. The butterfly revolution and the patchwork government are not innovations. They are regressions dressed up as disruption. What Yarvin wants is not freedom, it is obedience. It is a society where freedom means the freedom to serve, rights are rented, and if you are not useful, you are compost. And it's catching on. This is not just some fringe Reddit cult anymore. His ideas are echoed by vice presidents, advisors, and billionaires with too many satellites and not enough conscience. These people are not kidding. They are reshaping the world in their image, while we argue over whether it's rude to block your uncle on Facebook. If we do nothing, we will wake up one day in a nation we no longer recognize, where elections are relics, citizenship is a subscription, and justice is a brand reserved for shareholders. So what do? We fight, we organize, vote, protest, and push. We call out this dangerous ideology for what it is: authoritarianism in a new uniform. We invest in public institutions, not just as services, but as bulwarks of dignity. We defend education, journalism, and the public square. We refuse to let these Machiavellian tech bros repackage feudalism and sell it to us with a promo code. We push back loudly, unapologetically, and together, because democracy is not just a system. It is a rebellion against tyranny, a promise that no one gets to rule by divine right or by market dominance. And that promise only survives if we make it real every single day. So pick your patch carefully, because we are in one now, but unlike Yarvin's fantasy, this patch is not walled off, it is woven from resistance. That's all for Brainrot News. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe before we're declared non-productive and converted to biodiesel.